guys, welcome to the 6th lesson of Blockstack plus React. On the previous lesson, we worked on the login and the logout functionality. And for this lesson, we're going to be refactoring the login component to make it a little bit cleaner and isolate some of the functionality into a single component. Let's look at the code. Currently, all the sign in and sign out logic is being handled inside of the app component. But what we want to do is move the sign in functionality into a separate component. So what I'm going to do first is create a components folder. And inside of the components folder, I'll create a login folder. And inside of the login, I'm going to create an index.jsx. And inside of the index.jsx, I'm going to import React and component from React. And then I'm going to create a class-based component. So login extends component. And for now, we're going to render just a simple div. Hello login. Cool. So what we want to do inside of this component is transfer some of the logic that's occurring in app.js into this specific component. Instead of rendering out just a single button, what we want to do is reference to the login component that we created. And the login component will take in a prop called user session. And we can erase this information. Actually, let's copy this information and save it for later. And since the login component is not being imported, we need to go up and import login from components login. And then what we need to do inside of our login component is create a inside of the div. We could remove the hello login and reference to this button. And since the button is not being imported by React Bulma components, we need to do that as well. From React Bulma components. And we should save that information, and we should save that information. And we also need to cut and paste the handle sign in function because that is what handles the sign in process. So I'm going to remove that from here and move it over here and add it here. And instead of this.state, it will be this.props. And lastly, let's add some styling around it. So what I'm going to do is first going to add a card and content. And instead of using a div, I'm going to be using a card here. And then we could do card.content. And inside of the card.content, we could reference to the content variable, the content component, and move the button inside of there. And one of the things that I forgot to add was the prevent default in case. And here we can do e.prevent default and user session.react sign in. Cool. Another thing that I want to consider is the possibility that when the page initially loads and you click the sign in process, it opens up a new window. So it would be nice to have some kind of feedback to the user that the login process is currently loading. So let's add a state called loading. And we can default that value to false. And then when the handle sign in process happens, we could set the loading state to true. And so we're going to destructure that loading information. And essentially say, if you're loading, then we'll just do a simple div for now that says loading. And we're going to use the other tertiary operator again to render the spinner. So in other words, if the loading process is occurring, then show the loading text, otherwise show the sign in button. And now in app.js, everything should be good to go. And now let's look at our browser. I have the app already running on localhost, so we could take a look at the browser immediately. So when I sign out, it gives me a nice little card container, but as you can tell, it's being fixed to the edges. What I want to do is keep it somewhat contained and give some padding on the edges. In the code on app.js, we need to import another component called container. And inside of the div, we're going to reference to the container component. And we will put the information below inside of that container. Now let's look at the browser and see what changes were made once we wrap everything inside of a container component. As you can see, the container creates a padding in between the left and right side of the page, and it kind of looks a little bit cleaner. Let's change the sign-in text so we can give some distinction on what the user is signing in with. In login.jsx, we'll change this to sign in with Blockstack. And with the updates, it'll look like this. Cool. So if we sign in with Blockstack, techrally2.connect. Awesome. What I also want to show is that on the first initial tab, it's going to be showing the loading ... text that we referenced to. And so what's happening is that once the user clicks sign in, the first browser will show to the user that the sign in process is occurring, and then the new tab will take over once the user is signed in. This was a very simple refactoring, and we were able to move the logic from app.js into a separate isolated logging component. For the next lesson, I want to create another isolated component for the sign out page, but we'll keep it a little bit more unique by adding it to a nav bar. I'll see you then.